Admiral Kthar stood in the dimly lit observation room, his 6 eyes scanning the small human child sitting in front of the starship simulator. The child appeared calm, far too calm for someone who was about to face one of the most difficult simulations the fleet had ever created. The drill was designed to push anyone beyond their limits, yet here sat a human child, no older than 10 years of age, staring ahead at the console with an intensity that unsettled even the hardened officers around him. Kthar had seen many species participate in these drills, but never a human, and certainly never one so young. The boy was a strange choice. He thought, but orders were orders, and so he watched carefully. The simulation began without warning. Alarms blared to life. Red lights flashed in every corner of the room as the simulation triggered a catastrophic hull breach. A section of the ship was breached, sending explosive decompression through the vessel. The holographic crew was supposed to scatter in panic, while the child was meant to flounder. Kthar had seen it before. An officer or soldier under pressure would hesitate, even freeze, in the face of disaster. The species in the room with him all shared that flaw. But as the hull cracked open, the child's fingers never hesitated. They were already moving over the console. His face remained focused and serene, as if he were solving a problem rather than responding to a disaster. Kthar's curiosity grew. Was this child simply a fluke? Had he been given some kind of advanced training that other humans lacked? No, that seemed impossible. No species could train a child to respond to this level of pressure. The boy was just too calm. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't frozen in fear like most species would be. He was thinking. Kthar observed closely. The child immediately activated the damage control systems, rerouting power to vital areas and sealing off the breached section. With flawless execution, Kthar's eyes narrowed. What should have been chaos had turned into a quiet and deliberate response, and that was when something shifted inside the Admiral. The boy wasn't acting like he was playing a game. He was acting as though he were in command, as though his every action meant life or death. And with each passing second, Kthar felt an uncomfortable realization creeping into his mind. This child was handling this crisis better than most seasoned officers. Would Kthar had expected a moment of frantic scrambling the way every other species he had watched in these drills reacted, but the boy's actions defied expectations in a way that was both fascinating and troubling. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. He was calm, calculating. The way he moved between the different consoles almost seemed like a dance. The boy seemed to know exactly what needed to be done without second-guessing himself. Kthar's mind raced. Was this a simulation flaw, or had humanity been underestimated for far too long? The child had sealed the breach, but there were more problems. The ship was heading towards an asteroid field. How would the boy react next? Kthar leaned forward in his seat. The child was about to show him something, but what was it? Could he sustain this level of calm under more extreme pressure? Or would he finally falter and reveal his weakness, as so many others had done before? The simulation escalated quickly as the asteroid field loomed ahead. The ship's warning systems blared louder now, their shrill alerts making the officer's eyes flicker in discomfort. Kthar watched as the boy's fingers moved with unnerving speed and confidence across the controls. The child hadn't even flinched when the ship was rocked by another impact. His face remained composed, his eyes locked on the readouts, his mind far beyond what Kthar would have considered normal for someone so young. The child's movements were deliberate, never rushed, as though he had seen this scenario play out 1,000 times before. The simulation was designed to test the reactions of the crew in real time, to see how quickly they could assess and react to a rapidly changing environment. Most species, even the highly disciplined Zolothians, struggled with the shifting nature of such crises. They were trained to think in linear patterns, reacting in ways that were expected, safe, and calculated. But the human child was different. His approach wasn't linear. It wasn't predictable. There was an unpredictability to his actions that Kthar hadn't anticipated, and it was this very element that made the Admiral uneasy. A new threat arose. An asteroid the size of a moon was hurtling toward the ship. The ship's systems were already stretched thin, and the impact would likely shatter the hull. Kthar braced himself for the boy to freeze. That's what anyone would do, especially a child, especially a human child. But instead of fear, Kthar saw something else in the boy's eyes. There was no panic, only a sudden, sharp clarity. The child didn't hesitate. He commanded the ship to enter evasive maneuvers, his hands moving with confidence. Hithar's breath caught in his throat as the boy input the commands, calculating angles and velocity with the precision of a seasoned officer. The asteroid continued its approach, but instead of running from it, the boy was steering them directly toward it. Thar could hardly believe his eyes. The human child wasn't trying to avoid the asteroid. He was preparing for an impossible course correction that would take them just through the asteroid field. The ship veered left and right with alarming speed, the artificial gravity shifting as the boy forced the craft into maneuvers that seemed borderline suicidal. The officers in the room couldn't hide their disbelief. They had watched hundreds of species struggle with this simulation. Even the bravest soldiers and most advanced AI systems had failed to navigate such a scenario without damage or catastrophic failure. But the child was weaving through the asteroid field like it was nothing more than a playground. "Impossible," one of the officers murmured, but Githar didn't answer. He didn't have the words. He was too transfixed by the boy's movements. The child's eyes were wide but focused, no hint of fear. It was as if he were born for this. Born to navigate life-threatening situations with no sense of hesitation, only absolute resolve. The simulation continued to intensify, with asteroid after asteroid slamming into the ship's shields, but the boy's calculations were flawless. He was not just responding to what was happening in real time. It was as if he had anticipated the next move before it even came. Thar had never seen anything like it. The ship made it through the asteroid field, emerging into the blackness of space with only minor scratches on its hull, and the human child was still as calm as ever. He had done the impossible. He had defied the expectations of every officer in the room, and more importantly, he had defied Githar's own understanding of what it meant to survive. As the ship emerged from the asteroid field, the officers around Githar sat in stunned silence, watching the human child with new eyes. The boy had done the unthinkable, something that no species, not even the Zolothians, could have expected. His fingers, still steady, hovered over the controls as the simulation entered its next phase. The ship was now on a collision course with a rogue star, and the pressure on the boy would only grow. The simulation was designed to push beyond the limits, but there was no way the child could continue at this level, could he? Yathar's thoughts raced, but his eyes remained fixed on the boy. The child's expression was still one of concentration, but now there was something else, an intensity that was almost too calm. The atmosphere around the simulator shifted. For the first time, it wasn't just the officers who were holding their breath. Yuthar felt a gnawing sensation in his gut, a growing realization that this wasn't just a test. There was something far deeper at play here. The human child wasn't just fighting against the system or a simulated disaster. He was fighting with it, thinking faster than the program itself, rewriting the rules of the game. The rogue star's gravity was now pulling the ship in, its massive gravitational field distorting space around them. The ship's systems were failing again, power dropping rapidly as the core threatened to collapse. The officers exchanged nervous glances. This was it. This would be the moment where the human child would show his limits, where the inevitable mistake would occur. Surely no one could survive such pressure. But the child did something unexpected. He activated a series of emergency protocols that weren't part of the standard drill, something entirely new. Thar's eyes widened as he realized what the boy was doing. The child wasn't just trying to correct the ship's trajectory. He was actively reprogramming the ship's core systems, bypassing the safeguards, hacking the very infrastructure that kept the vessel in one piece. Thar's shock grew as he watched the boy manipulate the system like a master craftsman, his small hands moving with expert precision. The ship's systems flickered back to life, the gravity fluctuations stabilizing as the ship fought the pull of the rogue star. Thar could scarcely believe it. The boy had bypassed multiple levels of encryption, re-engineered systems that even the most sophisticated minds in the galaxy would find impenetrable, all without any formal training. And yet here he was, calm, composed, rewriting the very fabric of the simulation. The officers were no longer whispering. They were staring in awe. Thar's mind raced. This wasn't just a display of skill. This was genius. The boy wasn't thinking like any officer or soldier Thar had ever encountered. He wasn't working within the confines of expected logic. He was thinking outside the box, seeing possibilities no one else could. The human child was using raw instinct, intuition, and intelligence in ways that were beyond anything Thar had ever seen. A few more calculations, and the ship was back on course. The rogue star's influence had been mitigated, and the ship was slowly regaining stability. Thar stood up from his seat, his eyes fixed on the boy as the simulation began to wind down. There was no applause, no congratulations. The child didn't need them. He had done what no one had thought possible. As the simulation came to an end, the ship's systems returned to normal. And the boy sat back in his chair, his hands resting on his lap. He had just completed one of the most difficult simulations in the fleet, one that had left seasoned officers gasping for breath. Yet the boy seemed entirely unaffected. He looked up at Githar, eyes wide and innocent, as if he had simply finished a game. Githar could hardly believe what he had witnessed. His respect for the human species had already grown, but now it was something more. An awe that reached deep into his core. There was no mistaking it. Humanity was far more capable than anyone had ever realized. The room fell into an eerie silence as the simulation ended and the boy sat there, motionless, his small chest rising and falling with only the faintest sign of exertion. The hum of the ship's systems returning to normal was the only sound that broke the stillness. The child had just saved the ship from a catastrophic failure, had prevented the impossible from happening, and yet he looked almost bored. Thar felt his mind racing, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. His 6 eyes flickered over to the other officers in the room, who were still staring at the child with a mixture of disbelief and awe. It wasn't just the technology that had surprised them. It was the child's mind, his ability to think on a level far beyond his years. No one in the room had expected such mastery, such instinct from a human child. In fact, they had all expected the opposite. They had been prepared to watch him crumble under pressure, to see him fail like so many others before him. But instead, the boy had not only survived, he had succeeded in ways that defied all logic. Is this some kind of trick? One officer asked quietly, still unsure whether they had been witness to a grand illusion. But Githar knew there was no trick. There was no deception. What they had seen was real. Thar's voice was steady but low as he turned toward the officer. No, it is no trick. What we witnessed today was remarkable. There is no denying the boy's ability. The officer shifted uncomfortably, still not fully grasping the implications. Thar took a deep breath and turned his focus back to the child. The boy was now standing, stretching, as if the intense crisis they had just navigated was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. It was both unsettling and awe-inspiring to witness such calm, such assurance. The simulation had been designed to break the participants. It had been crafted to push the crew members beyond their breaking points, to force them into impossible situations and see how they would react. The boy had faced it all, the hull breach, the asteroid field, the rogue star, and had come out unscathed, even improving the systems in ways that were beyond the capability of many fully trained officers. But this was no mere game. The stakes had been as high as they could get, yet the boy had approached each new crisis with the mind of a seasoned commander. Thar's eyes narrowed as the realization hit him like a shockwave. The boy wasn't just surviving this simulation. He was adapting to it, outthinking it, turning it into his own challenge. What Githar had seen was something that no one had expected, a human child with a kind of mental fortitude and tactical insight that surpassed even some of the most brilliant minds Githar had encountered in his time. This isn't just a game for him, Githar murmured to himself, the weight of his words sinking in. The officers around him heard it and turned to him, their expressions puzzled. "What do you mean, Admiral?" one of them asked. Thar slowly turned to face them, his voice filled with a new sense of understanding. I mean that this boy, this human, isn't playing by the same rules we are. His mind works in ways we can't predict. He doesn't simply react. He calculates. He thinks faster than the simulation can process. One of the officers frowned. But he's just a child. He couldn't have learned all of this in such a short time. Cathar shook his head, his thoughts spinning faster than he could process. He wasn't taught this. This is something inherent in him. It's not learned, not trained. It's part of who he is. And that makes him more dangerous than anything we've ever faced before. The words hung in the air like a weight, heavy and undeniable. The boy's innate abilities had shaken Cathar's understanding of the human species to its core. The child wasn't just smart, he was special. And this was no longer just a simulation. It was a glimpse into something much greater, something that humanity had only just begun to show the galaxy. The silence in the observation room was thick, almost suffocating. Every officer stood frozen, their eyes not leaving the boy as he moved away from the simulator console. He had done something no one had expected. Not only had he survived the most grueling test the fleet could produce, but he had also reshaped it. He hadn't just reacted to the challenges, he had mastered them. The Admiral could feel the weight of this moment sinking in, and it wasn't just the shock of seeing such a young human perform so well. It was the understanding that humanity, in its rawest form, possessed something different, something rare. Cathar's mind turned in 1,000 different directions. Was this a one-time anomaly, a rare instance of pure human genius? Or was this a reflection of something deeper, something universal to all humans? No other species in the galaxy had shown this kind of innate adaptability, this ability to think faster, to improvise solutions where none seemed to exist. Even the greatest minds among the Zolothians, known for their mental acuity, would have struggled with such tasks. The human child had taken on what should have been an impossible situation and turned it into a triumph. The child, who had been standing quietly by the simulator, glanced up, his face still as serene as ever. He caught Cathar's eyes, and for a moment, the Admiral felt something strange stir inside him. The boy wasn't just a soldier, a test subject, or even a child. He was something else. It was like looking into a window to humanity's soul, an unyielding spirit that wouldn't back down, no matter the odds. "Admiral," one of the officers finally spoke, breaking the thick silence. "What do we do now?" Cathar didn't immediately answer. His gaze never left the boy. The simulation had ended, and yet the test hadn't truly finished. The child had passed, but Cathar knew this was only the beginning. What humanity had shown today wasn't just their ability to survive in the face of danger. It was the power of their resolve, the strength of their will to win. This wasn't a game, not in the way they had thought. "What does humanity have?" Cathar began, his voice low but steady. "That makes them so different." The question hung in the air, unanswered for a long while. The officers seemed confused by the question, unsure of how to respond. They were so used to seeing other species, Zolothians, Mornans, and the Drakari, each with their own strengths, their own ways of adapting to the galaxy. But humanity was something entirely different. It wasn't just their intellect, their cunning, or their resourcefulness. It was how they approached everything, how they never, ever gave up, no matter the circumstance. Another officer, still shaken by the performance, spoke up. "Admiral, you're suggesting that this child's abilities aren't just a fluke." Cathar turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "No, I'm saying that humanity is capable of this on a level we've never seen before. It's not a fluke. It's a characteristic of their species, a fundamental trait ingrained in them from the very start. This child, he embodies what it means to be human. And that is something we need to reconsider." The child, hearing the Admiral's words, tilted his head slightly, almost as though he understood what was being said. He wasn't listening just to the words. They weren't necessary. He had already proven something greater than any test could measure. He had proven that humanity's strength wasn't just in its ability to fight or survive. It was in its refusal to be defeated, to find solutions where others saw only dead ends. Thar's heart slowed, and a strange understanding began to settle in his mind. He had come here expecting to witness a test, a demonstration of humanity's potential. What he had witnessed, however, was a revelation, one that stretched far beyond the confines of a simple simulation. Humanity had something that no other species had, a will to push forward, no matter the odds, a drive to exceed expectations, even in the face of certain failure. This is no game, Thar whispered to himself, the realization striking him with a force he couldn't ignore. The boy had shown him more than just brilliance. He had shown him the essence of humanity. The weight of Githar's words lingered in the room like a thick fog. The officers stood still, processing the Admiral's quiet revelation. They had all come here with the belief that humanity was just another species in the galactic tapestry. Resourceful, yes, but no different than the countless others they had encountered in their time. But now, watching this human child, they began to question everything they had thought they knew about the species. Thar turned his attention back to the boy. The child stood still, unmoved by the tense atmosphere in the room. His expression was almost serene, like a calm lake untouched by the storms that had just passed through the simulation. He had passed a test that even the most battle-hardened veterans would have struggled to survive. Yet there he was, standing as though nothing had happened at all. Thar's mind raced, turning over the implications of the child's performance. This wasn't just about intelligence. This wasn't even about skill. It was something deeper. The boy had demonstrated an unshakable confidence, a kind of raw determination that no other species could replicate. There was a certain ferocity in that calm. It was a quiet fire that burned inside the human spirit, a fire that wouldn't be extinguished by anything. The room remained silent, but there was a new energy in the air. The officers were beginning to speak in hushed tones, their earlier disbelief giving way to curiosity, then to awe. No one had ever seen anything like this, not even from the most elite soldiers or the brightest minds of other species. They had all assumed that humans, like so many others, had their limits, that there would come a point in the simulation where they would crack under the pressure. But the boy hadn't cracked. In fact, he had turned every challenge into an opportunity to prove something greater. One officer finally found the courage to speak. "Admiral, what does this mean for the future? Are we to believe that every human is capable of such brilliance?" Thar stood motionless, considering the question. The simulation had shown him only a glimpse of what humanity was capable of, but it was enough to shatter his preconceived notions. The child had acted as though there were no obstacles too great to overcome, as if he had known, instinctively, that no matter how dire the situation, there was always a way to find a solution. And if one solution didn't work, another could be forged. Humans weren't bound by the same rules that governed other species. They weren't confined by limitations. If they couldn't move forward one way, they would find another path. There was no retreat in their thinking, only advance. "I don't know," Thar said finally, his voice steady. "But I do know this. This child, he's not an anomaly. He is the future of humanity. This is what they are capable of when they're pushed to their limits. This is why we cannot underestimate them." The officers exchanged glances, still unsure of how to process Githar's words. There was a clear shift in the atmosphere now. The question wasn't whether humanity would pose a threat, but how much of a threat. Could they, as a species, harness this boundless potential? And if they did, what could stop them? "Is it possible," one officer began hesitantly, "that humans are more dangerous than we thought?" Thar nodded, his gaze never leaving the child. "Yes, and that is what we need to understand. This child has shown us only a fraction of what humanity is capable of. There is more, much more." The child shifted, his gaze meeting Githar's once again. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no sense of superiority, only the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who they were. someone who understood the weight of the challenges they faced and was ready to meet them head-on. Cathar felt a chill run down his spine. Humanity was no longer just another species in the galaxy. It was a force to be reckoned with, and they had only just begun to show their true potential. The room grew heavier with each passing second. Thar's mind was a whirlwind, his thoughts clouded by a realization that had settled deep within him. He had underestimated humanity. No, that was an understatement. They had been underestimated by the entire galaxy. What had just transpired wasn't merely the result of human intelligence or tenacity. No, it was something else, something far more dangerous. This child had defied every expectation, every limitation they had placed on his species. And it was clear to Cathar that this was no isolated incident. The humans had tapped into a potential they themselves had yet to fully understand. The officers around him were still processing, some whispering, some remaining silent in stunned awe. But there was no mistaking the shift in the air. There was a new understanding, a dawning realization among them all. Humanity wasn't just surviving in the galaxy. They were about to change it. But could the galaxy handle such a shift? "I've seen enough," one officer said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was shaky, almost reverent. "I didn't believe it before, but now." He trailed off, shaking his head. The others in the room nodded, their expressions matching his disbelief. They were still grappling with the magnitude of what they had witnessed, but the child had made it impossible to ignore. Cathar raised a hand, signaling for calm. "We've seen the capabilities of one human child, but we must ask ourselves this. If this is the potential of one, what is the potential of an entire species?" The room quieted as they all pondered that question. Cathar's thoughts drifted back to the child, who stood there, seemingly unfazed by the chaos around him. The boy's calmness was maddening. He was a living paradox. How could a child so young possess such depth of focus and resilience? How could someone so small wield such power? The child's eyes met Cathar's again, and for a fleeting moment, Cathar thought he saw something there, something deeper than mere intelligence. The boy was still, his face expressionless, but Cathar had the distinct impression that the child knew exactly what had transpired. He knew that Cathar understood now. It wasn't just that the boy had excelled in the simulation. It was that humanity itself had the ability to defy the odds, to rise above and beyond what any other species had ever thought possible. The Admiral felt a cold shiver run down his spine, but it wasn't fear. No, it was something else. A new understanding of what it meant to face humanity, not just in battle, but as an entity that could reshape the fabric of the galaxy. He turned away from the child, addressing the officers in the room once more. "This is not about one child, or even a few brilliant humans. This is about a species that thinks and acts in ways that none of us have predicted. It is time we reevaluated everything we thought we knew." One of the younger officers, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Admiral, are you suggesting that humanity could be a threat to the entire fleet? To the galaxy?" Cathar met the officer's gaze, his eyes hardening. "I'm not suggesting it. I'm stating it. Humanity is a threat. They are the most unpredictable force we've encountered. And it's not just in warfare or strategy. It's in their very essence. They will never stop pushing forward. If we are to survive, we must understand them, and we must prepare." The officers nodded slowly, each one fully grasping the gravity of the situation. The realization was spreading through them now. Humanity wasn't just another race to conquer or ignore. They were a force that could shift the entire balance of power in the galaxy. But with this new knowledge came an unsettling question. Could the galaxy's existing powers, like the Zolothians, truly coexist with humanity, or would it lead to conflict? Cathar turned back to the child, whose gaze never wavered. The boy wasn't just a harbinger of change, he was the embodiment of it. And Cathar couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's future was now intimately tied to the future of the galaxy itself. The child had proven it. They would not just survive, they would thrive, and in doing so, change everything. As the moments stretched on, the weight of Githar's words settled on the officers like a heavy cloak. The room had grown still, each person grappling with the profound implications of what they had witnessed. The human child had done more than perform well in the simulation. He had shattered their understanding of what was possible. It was as if every belief they held about human limitations, their capacity for innovation, and their survival instincts had been rewritten in real time, before their very eyes. Thar took a deep breath, his thoughts still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. His mind raced through countless scenarios. The potential for humanity to rise up as a dominant force in the galaxy was no longer a mere hypothetical. It was a reality that Githar and his fellow officers had to face, whether they were ready or not. He had seen the evidence with his own eyes. What one human child was capable of, the entire species could achieve. They were relentless, adaptable, and far more formidable than he had ever imagined. The child had not once faltered during the simulation. When faced with overwhelming odds, he had simply recalculated, adjusted, and overcome. He had navigated the most impossible of situations with the natural grace of someone who didn't even consider failure an option. To Githar, this wasn't just the mark of a talented individual, it was the hallmark of an entire species' nature. Humans, it seemed, never saw obstacles as permanent. They saw them as opportunities to grow, to learn, to improve. He turned to the officers once more. We have only just begun to scratch the surface. If humanity is allowed to grow unchecked, to evolve and spread across the galaxy, they will not remain the small, insignificant species that we once thought. They will be a force that we must reckon with, a force capable of changing the very nature of galactic power. An uncomfortable murmur spread through the room. The young officer from before raised his hand, his voice trembling slightly. Admiral, you're saying that the galaxy must prepare for a new reality. That humanity could potentially become an adversary, a rival. Githar nodded gravely, his eyes never leaving the boy. Humanity will not remain the underdogs forever. They are resourceful. They are clever. They adapt faster than we can predict. We've seen it with this child, and in time we will see it with every human they send into the stars. They will reshape the galaxy to suit them, just as they've reshaped this simulation. The officer shifted uncomfortably, but then spoke with newfound resolve. So, what do we do, Admiral? How do we prepare for something like this? Thar paused, his gaze lingering on the boy. The child, who had been the catalyst for this new understanding, was still calm, still focused. It was as though the boy had already anticipated this conversation, as though he understood that he was no longer just part of an experiment, but the beginning of something far greater. We learn, Thar said, his voice resolute. We study. We observe. We understand humanity's strengths, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their drive. Because if we fail to understand them now, we will be caught unaware later. This is no longer a question of whether humanity is ready to enter the galactic stage. It's a question of whether we are ready for them. The officers nodded in silent agreement, their expressions hardening with the realization that the universe was changing. Humanity's rise wasn't just inevitable, it was coming faster than they could have ever imagined. And when it came, they would need to be ready. As Githar turned to leave, his mind still grappling with the enormity of what he had just acknowledged, he glanced back one last time at the boy. The child's gaze was unwavering, as if he had already won the game that Githar had only just started to comprehend. The future was no longer just about who had the most power or the strongest weapon. It was about who had the resilience to keep going, to never stop pushing forward. Humanity had shown that, and in doing so, they had just placed themselves at the very center of the galaxy's future. Githar left the room with a sense of urgency. The galaxy would never be the same again.